Well, Victoria's opposition are appealing to the hotel quarantine inquiry reopened for public evidence, and the Premier Daniel Andrews and his now former Health Minister Jenny Mikakos to be recalled. It comes as Mikakos fell on her sword, resigning Saturday after the Premier nominated her as responsible for the fatally botched program, a claim, of course, that she has disputed.
She issued a statement. That statement makes it very clear that she could no longer sit in the Cabinet. Any minister that comes to that conclusion has no choice but to resign. That's the appropriate thing to do. That's exactly what I have said. Beyond that, if you want any more specificity about her reasons, then you would need to speak to her.
Victorian Liberal MP and Shadow Attorney General Ed O'Donoghue joins me now from Melbourne. Thank you for your time. The evidence given by the Premier on Friday is a contradiction of the evidence given by the Health Minister just the day before. Then, of course, the Minister resigns over the weekend. Now, I find it extraordinary that on Monday, neither of them are called back to the inquiry. And in fact, the inquiry goes to closing remarks. What do you make of it all, Ed O'Donoghue?
Peter, good evening and great to be with you. Thank you for having me. I agree with you 100%. The inquiry's job is not finished. Two of the central players in this whole fiasco that has cost Victorians billions of dollars, over 750 lives, we have conflicting evidence between the Premier and the former Health Minister. That needs to be resolved. They need to be called back and they need to clarify their positions, and the inquiry needs to test their evidence so we understand the truth. We still, Peter, don't have the truth and the answer to the simple question of who ordered security guards in place of police or ADF at the hotel quarantine.
There's also, beyond this conflicting information between the Premier and Jenny Mikakos, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Jobs Regions and Precincts, well, they dumped numerous documents into evidence at the inquiry late on Friday evening after the last witnesses had been called. Now, I regard that as pretty unorthodox. What do you say?
Peter, it's worse than unorthodox. It's an absolute disgrace. It's treating the inquiry with contempt. The government has at its resources an army of people who can get material to the inquiry when it needs it. To table it in the minutes after the last witness has finished is simply a disgrace, and it makes a mockery of Daniel Andrews' comments about being open and transparent and helping the inquiry. Rather than helping the inquiry, his departments have hindered the inquiry. They've lawyered up with QCs to try and run interference with witnesses when they're giving evidence, and then after the evidence is concluded, they're tabling thousands of pages of additional documents. There may be very well central issues in those documents that need to be further tested, and if so be, the inquiry should call extra witnesses to do just that.
Look, there's been repeated calls, they haven't gone away, for the Premier to hand in his resignation. Here's what he said again today.
I indicated the other day I don't run from challenges, I don't run from problems. I'm not someone who quits to avoid doing the hard work that needs to be done.
Well, today the focus then shifted to the public servants, but I can't see how they go and ministers remain. I think that's pretty much the view too of Paul Kelly in terms of the principle of ministerial responsibility. I mean, it includes every minister right up and not leaving the Premier out either. Again, Ed O'Donoghue, this is where we are today. It looks to me that there's a real attempt to scapegoat public servants.
Peter, as you say, in our system of democracy that we are so lucky to have and enjoy, ultimately ministers are responsible when things go terribly wrong. And it's simply not good enough, and it's not an excuse to say, I didn't know. What were these ministers doing? Were they asleep at the wheel while the hotel quarantine fiasco ran loose without them knowing? I mean, that's almost willfully blind to the consequences of this disaster, the biggest public policy disaster in Victoria's history.
And just before we go, I've got to ask you, that legislation, a lot of concern, it's before the Parliament, opposed by the Bar Council, the Law Institute, just about everybody else. It has passed the lower house. The government say they're determined to have it pass the upper house. Where's it up to, Ed O'Donoghue?
Well, Peter, I hope the crossbench listen to reason. They listen to this growing number of eminent lawyers who are calling for this legislation to be defeated, because it will infringe on people's rights. It will give an authorised officer, who could literally be anyone, the power to detain someone on the suspicion they may do something in the future. I mean, this is Australia, this is Victoria, this is not Eastern Europe during the Cold War. This legislation is a massive overreach, and the simple question that is yet to be answered is, why is it needed at all? Why is it needed now when COVID numbers are coming down so dramatically?
I'll leave it there. Shadow Attorney General for Victoria, Edward O'Donoghue, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Peter.